You're saying you will support it or you do support it? Talk straight with me.
I do support the proposal.
There you go. I support the proposal of adding the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic to Russia. Shortly before the Ukraine war started, we were all baffled by the Security Council exchange between Putin and the fearful foreign intelligence chief Sergei Narishkin, who slipped up under pressure. 3 hours later, Putin recognized the independence of the breakaway republics in the televised statement, and he would demand that Ukraine immediately has to stop any kind of hostilities. But it wasn't Ukraine who would start the hostilities. In this video, we created the events from the day before the invasion and day 1 of the war. This was possible thanks to the channel Minute by Minute. These guys have already made 2 dozens of such reconstructions on their Telegram and X page. But today, we'll focus on those fateful days from 2 years back. It all started 20 minutes before the Security Council meeting. The former Ponzi scheme executive and the then Donetsk People's Republic, short DPR, leader Denis Pushilin asked Putin to recognize the independence of the DPR. On behalf of the DPR residents, we are asking you to recognize the DPR as an independent, democratic and social state governed by law. The head of the Luhansk People's Republic, short LPR, Leonid Pasechnik, followed and did the same. I am asking you to recognize the independence and sovereignty of the Luhansk People's Republic. Note that neither Pushilin nor Pasechkin asked Putin for an armed invasion or constitutional annexation of those self-appointed national republics to Russia. They were only asking for sovereignty. Pushilin explained that it was the only way to avoid civilian casualties, destroyed infrastructure and ruined homes. 20 minutes later, Russian TV started broadcasting the pre-recorded video of the Security Council meeting. Putin opened the proceedings by saying that the key job was to, quote, ensure the country's sustainable, positive and peaceful development. He added that under no circumstances could Ukraine join NATO. Allegedly, it was all about the annexed territory of Crimea. If Russia faces the threat of Ukraine joining NATO, the threat it poses to our country will be enormous. But because no one acknowledges the voices of Crimea and Sevastopol residents, and Ukraine insists that it's their territory, we are facing a real threat of them reclaiming these lands they consider to be theirs militarily. Putin gave the floor to Sergei Lavrov, who said that Secretary of State Blinken had agreed to meet on February 24th. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, called me a couple of days later and said he had gotten familiar with our proposal and offered a meeting to discuss it, to present the position of the US and perhaps ask questions. Putin, it seemed, didn't like this idea. But here's what Dmitry Kozak, the Russian-Ukraine negotiator, had to say. According to him, negotiations had hit a dead end. He asked about the prospects of annexing the Donbas and the way it could affect the talks with the West. Mr. President, I'd like to answer the question if we should or shouldn't annex Donbas. What will we do about them? How can it be used in our talks with the West? This is a truly serious matter. Yeah, and? Putin smiled viciously and suggested that Kozak should just limit it to the recognition of the Republic's sovereignty and admitted that negotiations would be useless. Putin gave the floor to Dmitry Medvedev. During his single-term presidency, Russia started a war against Georgia. This is how the events unfolded in 2008-2009. They came to us and asked us to restore the relations. Let's face it, globally, to our friends, to the US, and to the European Union, Russia means much more than Ukraine. He then added that more than 800,000 Donbas residents had obtained Russian passports and they needed to be protected. Medvedev was followed by Valentina Matviyenko. She was outraged by the West's military aid packages to Ukraine. It is likely that she wasn't aware yet of the newest denazification narrative by the Kremlin and asked, does the West not realize that Bandera nationalists could rise to power in the future and misuse their weapons? Will this make Europe more stable? Would that be a path to peace and sustainability in Europe? The meeting was broadcasted as a live stream, but Prosecutor General Igor Krasnov's speech was edited out. Why? We won't find out about it anytime soon. The surveillance camera was covered with a black bag. The floor was taken by the earlier mentioned Sergei Narishkin. He said that the idea of Russia attacking Ukraine was created by the US State Department and had been inflated to such a level that it looks like it is propagating war. Narishkin suggested that the Western partners should be given one last chance.
I agree with Mr. Patrushev's offer to give our so-called Western partners one last chance
And ask them to tell Kiev to sign a peace treaty and implement the Minsk agreements. That's where Putin began to put him under pressure. And that's where everyone else seemingly understood what they were supposed to say. The Republic's sovereignty was supported by Defense Minister Shoigu and the Russian Guard Chief Zolotov. We need to go further to protect our country. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. In an hour-long televised talk, Vladimir Putin recounted the made-up story of Vladimir Lenin having created Ukraine and recalled NATO's alleged promise to move, quote, not an inch to the east, which he claimed was given to Gorbachev. He also counted how long it would take for NATO's missiles to reach Russia and compared it to holding Russia at knife point. He also brought up the alleged persecution of Ukrainians who speak Russian and said, many people in the Donbas just don't have enough money to pay their utility bills and they have to survive somehow. Why was the Russian president so concerned about the low wages, manufacturing problems and lack of independent courts in Ukraine and not in his own country, which he had been ruling for the past 2 decades? Neither Putin nor the Security Council had an answer to that. I see it as necessary to take a long overdue decision and recognize the independence and sovereignty of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. Putin declares the independence of the breakaway republics and demanded that Ukraine, quote, stopped the hostilities at once. Otherwise, he said, the current Ukrainian regime will be totally responsible for a potential bloodbath. I am sure that this decision will be supported by the Russian people and by each one of our country's patriotic forces. The Kremlin released the treaties signed by the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic. They didn't mention the borders, though. In less than 2 hours, the Biden administration ordered its Ukrainian embassy staff to relocate from Lviv to Poland. One of the officials tells the media that the Russian troops may not distinguish between the military and the civilian targets. Around the same time, the British Premier Minister Boris Johnson informed Zelensky that the invasion might begin in a matter of days, if not hours. The State Duma was getting ready to ratify the treaties, but there was no agreement on the exact location of the new borders. The head of the CIS committee proposed the, quote, new borders should be located where the new countries would feel comfortable to have them. But the Republic's representatives disagreed. Rodion Miroshkin from the LPR said the borders were the ones of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Dmitry Koroshilov urged Ukraine to withdraw its troops voluntarily, threatening an escalation. Following the ratification, the media was addressed by Speaker Vyacheslav Volodin. According to him, the treaty stopped a potential war and prevented a humanitarian disaster. Just think about what could have happened if we wouldn't have recognized their sovereignty. Russia has done everything to save the lives of millions of people and successfully avoided a war that would have taken a toll on everyone.
It was hard to tell if he was in on the invasion plans and therefore was lying, or if he meant what he said. The border's exact positions remained the biggest challenge, though. Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov tried to answer the journalist's question, but he couldn't and declined to comment instead. The Federal Council ratified the treaties of recognizing the sovereignty of the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics. Belarusian President Lukashenko addressed the meeting ahead of the Defender of the Fatherland Day and brought up the possibility of a horrendous inter-Slavic war. You have to stop. Get rid of your transatlantic owners. They won't make you happy. Once you stop to be useful to them, they will get rid of you and throw you into the dumpster of history. While addressing the Ukrainian nation, Lukashenko asked them to use their brain and make the right decision that would benefit all nations involved. 38 minutes later, Leonid Pasechnik, the leader of the Luhansk People's Republic, called on every man capable of shooting a firearm to step forward to protect the republic. 17 minutes later, Vladimir Putin sent a note to the Federal Council ordering the use of Russia's armed forces abroad. The workday was over ahead of an upcoming day off, but the Council resumed its session. The president mentioned the treaties with the DPR and the LPR and justified the deployment of the troops to the republics for allegedly protecting the peace. Council Speaker Valentina Matvienko said the decision would, quote, prevent civilians from being shelled, adding that Russian peacekeeping forces would arrive in the republics to ratify the documents. Putin told the media that the Minsk agreements do not exist anymore. The Russian Foreign Ministry ordered the evacuation of its embassy and consulates from Ukraine, citing alleged threats towards Russian diplomats. In the US, President Joe Biden said that Putin factually justified a large-scale invasion of Ukraine.
This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, as he indicated and asked permission to be able to do from his Duma.
In Ukraine, President Zelensky announced the call-up of reservists. As the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Army, I have issued a decree on the call-up of reservists for a period of emergency. The Ukrainian Security Council decided against martial law to avoid provoking Moscow. Newsweek reported that the Biden administration had warned Zelensky of the upcoming invasion within the following 48 hours, including an attack on Kiev from the Belarusian border. But it was the third warning issued over the previous month. In the evening, Zelensky and the country's leadership met with Ukraine's major business owners. The meeting was addressed by the optimistic defense minister Alexei Reznikov, followed by the determined commander-in-chief Valery Zaluzhny, who reported on the troops' readiness. It'll start at 4 in the morning, whispered the Surkis brothers. However, the business people just drove home. Meanwhile, at 11:46 p.m., Russian state media channel TASS reported that the LPR and the DPR heads had asked Putin to help them repel Kiev's attacks. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov picked up the phone. Putin rarely fills the foreign minister in on his foreign policy plans, but he made an exception. Lavrov was the first official to find out about the special military operation. Following the LPR and DPR call for the military aid from Russia, the Ukrainian government called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. Volodymyr Zelensky took the floor in what was his last pre-war address. He made his statement almost entirely in Russian. The former comedian and host of New Year entertainment shows on Russian TV, the Ukrainian president, addressed the Russians. Do the Russian people actually want a war? I'd be glad to be able to answer it. But the answer depends on you, the citizens of Russia. But the decision was already made. Large Russian military convoys were reaching the Milavoye checkpoint in the Luhansk region. Antony Blinken told NBC that Russia would invade Ukraine before dawn.
Unfortunately, Russia has positioned its forces at the final point of readiness across Ukraine's borders, to the north, to the east, to the south. Everything seems to be in place for Russia to engage in a major aggression against Ukraine.